I'm Alexander Verbeek, a freelance journalist passionate about preserving the environment. This summer I walked the Camino de Santiago to better understand the impact of climate change along this historical route. Along the way, I passed through the beautiful Rioja wine region where I learned about the farmers' challenges due to climate change. The area is getting warmer. Each decade, the harvesting moves forward about 2.5 days and the alcohol content increases. And this changes the grape's ideal balance for winemaking. And less rain and higher temperatures have reduced production in the past 4 years by some 5 to 10%. I was curious to understand more about what these changes mean for the future of the Rioja wines and understand better how local farmers can, if at all, counteract the effects of less rain and the impact on the wines. So my search for answers on how climate change is impacting life on the Camino de Santiago for the people that live there, but also for the pilgrims that walk the old Camino, led me here to Zurich, a beautiful park very close to the head office of Swiss Re, and I'm about to interview Stefanos Mystakidis. He's an agricultural risk analyst, and I would like to hear more from him on the impact of climate change on agriculture, but also how these changes impact the insurance industry. Hi, Stefanos. So kind of you to meet me. As I explained before, I've been walking the Camino de Santiago all the way from the French Pyrenees to Santiago de Compostela, especially when I was in the Rioja region where the famous Rioja wines are from. There I ended up with a lot of questions. So first of all, my question is, why is wine and vineyards interesting for Swiss Re? Because I had not expected to end up with you asking questions about vineyards.
Well, we are interested in vineyards because they are relevant to our clients' portfolio and exposure. At Swiss Re, we cover vineyards in many countries of our global portfolio, and especially in traditional wine-producing markets in Europe, such as in France, Italy, in Germany, in Austria, and Switzerland. We also acknowledge the cultural value of vineyards because in many countries they are treated as cultural landscapes or parts of cultural heritage, and they are even protected by law. We also recognize the massive transformation grapes have undergone over the last centuries. They were evolved from a source of nutrition back in the old days to a cultural product with wine production nowadays.
Yeah, so what kind of risks are we actually talking about for the insurance industry?
I would say that the risk profile of a vineyard depends on many different factors, including, for example, its location, the local weather and soil conditions, the variety grown, the management practices adopted by farmers, and many others. These factors are also relevant to other crops, and they highlight the complexity of agriculture. When it comes to weather-specific, weather-related perils, I would say that the usual suspects play a role. These include, for example, extreme temperatures. Although both sides of the temperature spectrum play a role, frost poses by far the largest risk to vineyards, especially in Europe. For example, late spring frost after the bud break might cause severe damage to vineyards and result in catastrophic losses, such as those the industry suffered back in 2017 or most recently in 2021. Then, looking at the other side of the temperature spectrum, warmer temperatures towards the end of the season may accelerate the critical stage of ripening and cause earlier harvest. As a result, the wine might have high sugar and alcoholic content. It is also known that early harvest can alter the acidity, the phenolic maturation, and the aromas of the wine. So overall, key characteristics of a wine's identity are altered. Then you have hail, and depending on the growth stage, it can cause significant damage to a wine's wood, fruits, and leaves. Although we know that air circulation and wind streams are important to vineyards, yet very strong winds might interrupt pollination and photosynthesis. Excess rainfall certainly plays a role, because it can cause soil erosion and reduce significantly soil health, while it also promotes the development and spread of vineyard pests.
Wow, these are a lot of challenges, and I can imagine that the farmers are rightly worried about it. When I was there, I learned that on average, by every 10 years, the harvest takes place 2.5 days earlier. So it's really moving forward. And I heard the farmers being worried about changing of the taste. So what's probably needed is adaptation. And do you know of examples of how farmers adapt to these new challenges?
Well, I would say that adaptation and mitigation are essential to strengthen the resilience of vineyards and in general of other agricultural systems to the impacts of climate change. For example, we already observe shifts in wine geography with grapes growing in cooler climate zones or in regions with low risk to freezing temperatures, such as coastal areas. We also observe that farmers tend to grow varieties that may emerge or bloom after the danger of frost has passed. We also know that some farmers might install wind machines or overhead sprinkler irrigation systems to mitigate the impact of frost. Although a bit controversial from a sustainability point of view, heating the air locally is one of the oldest ways to mitigate frost impacts on vineyards.
I heard about farmers planting trees, so there's more shade and they combine kind of trees and vineyards. Is that something you heard about?
Yes, it is called vitiforestry, which means growing trees in vineyards. And it is proposed as a mitigation measure to mitigate the impact of extreme temperatures. We know that trees produce shade, they also transpire water, and thus they cool the air locally. They also recycle minerals and they have the capacity to absorb and store carbon.
So how is the insurance industry reacting to these challenges? Do you make specific products?
Vineyards are currently covered mainly through traditional indemnity-based crop insurance products, named peril crop insurance, that covers single risks, including, for example, frost, hail, wind, flood, excess rainfall, erosion. In some countries, such as Portugal and Italy, sunburn is also covered, quality is often covered, etc. We also observe, especially after recent catastrophic losses caused by frost in Europe, an increasing offering and demand in the market of parametric insurance products such as frost indices and area yield indices. Although we need to acknowledge here that the basis risk of parametric insurance products can be large, especially for perils with highly localized nature and impact, such as frost and hail. At the same time, protection gap remains large. For example, we estimate that about 50% of vineyards in Europe are covered against hail, and only 20% of them are covered against frost.
Looking at the rapidly changing climate, we see now climate change all around us, where 5 years ago you maybe had to look more carefully to see it. I can imagine the insurance industry is also adapting, just like the farmers are adapting. So how do you adapt your products to climate change?
We recognize that the changing risk landscape calls for transformative changes to risk assessment in a crop reinsurance context. Backward-looking views may no longer be representative of the future, and crop reinsurance might need to develop forward-looking scenarios, such as those we develop in-house at Swiss Re for some other crops, key crops of our portfolio, in order to better assess changes in return periods of specific events, as well as changes in the impact of worst-case scenarios or catastrophic events, and with the ultimate purpose to better inform underwriting decision-making. And then we have the loss adjustment process, where we believe that a stronger engagement with technology will certainly help to reduce uncertainties and increase the subjectiveness of the process.
Wow, there's so many challenges. Are you optimistic about the future?
Well, despite the challenges, despite the changing risk landscape, we should always look forwards with optimism and stay confident that grape growers will adapt to the changing risk landscape as they did for centuries in the past. Besides, it is always important to keep in mind that high-quality viticulture is still sustained under the current unprecedented levels of global warming. Maybe next time that we drink a glass of wine, we take a moment to think that It embodies the soil, the weather, and the history of the area where it has been produced, but also all the efforts the farmer has invested in order to maintain quality at certain levels while trying to be at the same time sustainable and adaptive.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, we're going to do that, and then we drink to two traditions that merge here. We talk about the Camino since the Middle Ages in northern Spain as this old pilgrimage, and at the very same time wine growing developed in the same area, and both of them are adapting. Thank you so much for
I thank you, Alexander. Nice to meet you.
Thank you, Stefanos.